Imagine this. You're sitting in a silent room, dim light filtering through thick curtains, and in front of you is a woman. She doesn't speak, doesn't move, she simply exists. Yet strangely, her presence makes your heart tighten, not from pain, but from a feeling that's hard to name. It's as if you're standing at the edge of a cliff where a single step could lead you to paradise or send you falling into a bottomless abyss. Why does someone's mere presence have the power to shake your very being? Why does her beauty, her gentleness, or her vulnerable gaze cause even the strongest man to crumble from within? Not due to injury, but because he's drawn into an invisible maze of emotions, illusions, and a yearning to be acknowledged. Schopenhauer once wrote, "Woman is a violin on which a man loses his soul and his reason when attempting to play music he didn't compose." Perhaps he wasn't entirely wrong. Something strange happens when men face women. Not simply sexual attraction, not merely biological need, but a complete disturbance of the mind. It's where the ego wavers, where personal values are replaced by an obsessive gaze, and where the will to live, which Schopenhauer identifies as the root of all suffering, is awakened most intensely through love. But here's the paradox. If women embody inspiration, beauty, and life itself, why is loving them often the starting point of suffering? Why can even the smartest, strongest, most independent men lose themselves completely in a relationship that's neither violent nor forced, but simply filled with love? So, what exactly is a woman? Is she your salvation, or the most seductive form of an inner prison? Is she the embodiment of ethereal beauty, or the perfect incarnation of survival instinct, for which men trade everything to touch something seemingly eternal, but always fleeting? Pause for a moment and ask yourself, in your deepest moments of love, were you awakened or were you defeated? Leave your answer below, because the next part will lead you to what Schopenhauer calls the true origin of suffering, and the secret he sees behind a woman's smile. In Schopenhauer's philosophy, the entire world is the manifestation of one thing only: the will to live. It's not reason, not morality, not even love, just an invisible, blind force with no ultimate purpose other than survival, reproduction, and perpetuation. He calls it the will, the force that drives the tiger to hunt, compels humans to have children, and causes us to plunge madly into love for no logical reason other than irresistible impulse. Within that blind operation, Schopenhauer views women as the ultimate instruments used by the will to enchant, manipulate, and control men. This might sound extreme, sure, but set modern outrage aside for a moment and examine deeply the mechanism Schopenhauer describes. You think you choose your lover? You think it's a soulful connection? Schopenhauer would smile and reply, "No, it's just your genetic instinct choosing the best reproductive partner to create the next generation. You believe you love with your heart, but it's your genes whispering, 'Have children with this person.'" From that perspective, women, through their beauty, elegance, and reproductive capability, become gateways through which the will to live draws men into a game whose reward is not love, but dependence. Consider this. Why would a man at the peak of his career, intelligence, and freedom risk losing everything just because of a single glance? Why do kings, philosophers, and artists, people who deeply understand themselves, logic, and truth, still crumble under the weight of romantic love? Schopenhauer saw something few dare admit. A man thinks he's conquering a woman, but in reality, he's merely a victim of a blind force within himself. Worse yet, this force doesn't just control behavior, it distorts perception. He writes, "Women lack profound philosophical ability because they are the closest embodiment of the will to live. They don't need to understand life. They are life. Despite being controversial and widely criticized, this statement isn't purely meant to belittle women, but rather serves as a warning about how women function symbolically, as forms of existence through which the will binds others. In Schopenhauer's view, women don't need philosophy because their very presence is enough to make men forget philosophy. They don't need to create the world, for they themselves are the doorway through which the world enters, through birth, through emotion, and through attraction beyond logic. Yet, precisely there lies the contradiction. If women embody life, why is life so often intertwined with suffering? Schopenhauer explains that the more we're driven by the will to live, the more we suffer, desire, and become attached. In romantic relationships, nowhere is this will more powerfully active. In other words, women aren't the cause of suffering. They're simply the catalyst that awakens the strongest surge of the will to live within men. Now, look back at your own relationships. Isn't it true that at your deepest moments of love, you also lost your rationality most completely? Have you ever, in an effort to hold on to the woman you loved, done things completely opposed to your own values, principles, and intelligence? Do you really think you're loving a human being? Schopenhauer would say you're in love with the reflection of instincts you haven't yet mastered. But what about women? Schopenhauer sees them as closer to nature than men, and thus less tormented by philosophy. They don't struggle to find the meaning of life because they're already living fully in the roles assigned by the will to live, nurturing, attracting, and ensuring survival. Their awareness doesn't come from logic, but from emotional intelligence, reading needs, and creating new life. This doesn't mean they're superior or inferior, just that they operate on a different wavelength, a level that men, constantly torn between instinct and reason, find difficult to manage once drawn in. And here's the core of the issue. Men don't suffer because of women. They suffer from their own helplessness before the invisible power women represent. It's the pain of losing control over oneself. The pain of believing you're in love when you're really being driven by an unspoken force coursing through your veins. Schopenhauer didn't hate women as many people assume. He hated men's slavery to instincts they weren't even aware of. He wrote about women as symbols, not specific people, to warn men that if they don't recognize the root of their desires, they'll live as puppets controlled by the will, disguised in the name of love. So what's the way out? Can a man love without suffering? Can he see a woman not through eyes blinded by instinct, but through the clarity of someone who's fully awake? The next part won't focus on women anymore. Instead, it'll explore the invisible consequences of not understanding these truths and how the modern world makes Schopenhauer's questions more urgent than ever. Imagine a familiar scene. A successful, educated man who once declared he'd never lose himself to love. But gradually, without coercion or command, he starts changing how he dresses, how he speaks, his hobbies, his schedule, even his deepest dreams, to keep her around. No one taught him to do this. No manual instructed him on how to willingly and sweetly lose himself. Yet it still happens, because he doesn't realize that once the will takes control, consciousness becomes merely a shadow. And when a woman becomes a symbol of meaning, every other value inside him becomes a sacrifice to an emotion he can't even name. Schopenhauer calls this a fundamental self-delusion, when a man believes he's acting freely, but it's actually biological impulses disguised in beautiful words like love, sacrifice, and sincerity. In modern society, this self-deception is even more sophisticated. Not crude instincts like those of early humans, but behaviors programmed by culture, media, and what can be called the civilized mask of the will to live. You've probably seen ads saying, "A good man is someone who does everything for the woman he loves." Sounds noble, but what's behind it? a culturally acceptable dependence, a sacrifice stemming not from love, but from the fear of abandonment. It becomes even more dangerous when men aren't dependent just on one particular woman, but on the ideal image of the perfect woman. And that's when the shadow emerges. Carl Jung calls this the shadow, the hidden part of your soul, filled with desires, emotions, and wounds you're unwilling to acknowledge. But ask yourself, when you chase a woman so perfect that you lose yourself, what's driving you? Is it reason, or the suppressed darkness from your childhood, from feelings of rejection, or the desperate need for validation? Schopenhauer didn't use the term shadow like Jung, but he described a similar force. The will to live, distorted when unconscious, becomes an obsession, and women become mirrors reflecting parts of men that haven't healed. That's why some men become obsessed with conquest, not to truly love, but to earn approval, not for genuine connection, but to fill an inner void. And the woman, whether wonderful or toxic, unintentionally becomes the substitute for an unnamed pain. But the consequences aren't just psychological. It's also about how men drain themselves without realizing it. Every time you invest all your mental energy, time, creativity, and life force into someone else, without saving anything for yourself, you drift further from who you could become. Have you ever felt exhausted from maintaining a relationship rather than living authentically? Have you ever felt you're existing merely as a good enough version for someone else, instead of being your true self? Schopenhauer isn't just talking about love. He's describing the loss of identity in a trap disguised as happiness. Look at the bigger picture. Modern society glorifies love, but simultaneously places immense pressure on men. You must have a successful career, show emotions, yet remain strong, be responsible, but not controlling, love without jealousy, be romantic but never weak. It's a maze of roles that few dare to acknowledge. In that maze, men aren't only trying to keep a woman, they're trying to maintain the ideal image of what a man should be, an image they no longer even recognize. And what are the consequences? First, a loss of life energy, as the will to live becomes externally directed toward desire, preservation, and pursuit, rather than inward toward creativity, growth, and exploration. Second, personal disorientation, not knowing what you truly want without someone else by your side. Third, damage to your self-worth. When love ends, men don't just lose a partner, they lose the identity they've spent all their efforts protecting. And worst of all, they have no idea why it happened. They blame her, blame circumstances, or think they weren't good enough. But the truth may run deeper. They've never really controlled themselves because they've never understood what's controlling them. Schopenhauer saw this clearly more than 200 years ago. Though he spoke pessimistically, his legacy isn't hatred for women, but a warning. If you don't understand how your inner world operates, you'll become its victim. That moment of realization doesn't happen when you're heartbroken or betrayed. It comes when you wake up in a relationship that's still intact and realize you've lost yourself without ever noticing. There's no screaming, just emptiness. Not because the other person stopped loving you, but because you've stopped loving who you're becoming. And from that exact moment, the rebellion begins. Schopenhauer doesn't speak of rebellion in the ordinary sense. For him, true rebellion isn't fighting or leaving someone. It's about withdrawing your will to live from the illusions holding it captive, stepping out of your instinctive maze, and clearly seeing what's controlling you and why. Let's start here. You can't truly love unless you clearly understand what within you is loving. Is it really you, the conscious, self-aware you, or your wounded ego seeking redemption? Or perhaps it's your inner child, once rejected and abandoned, clinging to the image of an ideal woman as the emotional mother you've always craved. You don't have to abandon love. You just have to abandon your illusions about it. Here's how you start separating the layers. First, separate desire from sincerity. Do you want to possess her or genuinely connect with her soul? One is the urge to control, the other, a longing to simply be present. Second, separate service from sacrifice. Are you caring out of love or out of fear of losing her? Kindness rooted in love is freedom. Kindness rooted in fear is a beautifully disguised chain. Third, separate true love from self-reflection. Do you love who she really is, or do you love the feeling of being loved by her? Do you see her, or do you only see your own worth reflected through her eyes? Schopenhauer doesn't give a clear way out, but amidst his philosophical darkness, there's a glimmer of hope. Only when you're no longer driven by the desire to possess can you truly be present. And from there, a silent yet powerful rebellion begins. Living without needing validation, loving without ownership, giving without expecting to keep anything back. You might ask, how is this possible in a world that teaches us love is transactional? How can you love deeply without becoming dependent? The answer isn't loving less, it's loving from a different level of consciousness. Look at the masters, not those who don't love, but those who love from a state of awakening. Nietzsche once said, "The strongest man is he who knows how to be alone. Not alone to withdraw from the world, but strong enough not to rely on the world's approval." Then, when you enter love, you don't enter it seeking completion, but to share the completeness you've already found in yourself. How do you reclaim your true self? First, have conversations with yourself. Write down clearly, what do I want in this relationship? Not from the other person, but from myself. You'll be surprised that most of your desires aim at filling voids rather than giving something genuine. Second, maintain untouchable areas of your life. A relationship is about sharing, not dissolving yourself. Keep parts of your life non-negotiable, your principles, your ideals, your goals. If someone can't respect these, it's not love, it's an emotional transaction. Third, practice solitude, not to escape, but to listen. Each week, each month, take time to step away from all interactions and ask yourself, who am I when no one is watching? The answer reveals your degree of freedom or dependence. This rebellion isn't loud. It doesn't need declarations. It occurs in every small choice. When you don't immediately reply to a message because you're writing, when you decline an invitation because you've scheduled reading time, when you say no to something that disrupts your sense of self, even if it hurts someone else's feelings. Schopenhauer isn't telling you love leads to happiness. Instead, he whispers that happiness doesn't come from having someone, but from not being controlled by anything. Only then does love become a choice rather than fate. The woman is no longer the doorway to hell, but a mirror, reflecting who you are when you've forgotten yourself. And if you dare to look into that mirror without stepping back, you'll no longer fear love, because you'll no longer be its victim. Imagine now you're sitting alone in a room filled with memories. No more laughter, no more of her gaze, no more late-night conversations that once made your heart beat with joy. Just you and silent emptiness. You look back and finally realize, she never truly hurt you. What hurt you was losing yourself, letting the vibrant, free, and authentic parts of you be buried just to keep someone who no longer wanted to stay. And then, like a blade slicing straight to your heart, a quiet but undeniable truth emerges. You've never been betrayed by anyone but yourself. Schopenhauer, in a brutally honest, yet insightful tone, points to what we always avoid. Love isn't the problem. The will to live isn't the problem. The problem is ignorance, letting instinct control your soul, allowing desire to replace presence. allowing the need to be loved become your reason for existing. Women aren't angels or demons. They're mirrors. Mirrors say nothing, but they reveal exactly who you are, especially when you're running from yourself. And here's the final truth. Love doesn't keep anyone around. Only your inner aliveness, your freedom, your awareness, your independence of spirit can truly hold someone's gaze. You don't have to be perfect or the ideal man. You only need to return to the self that was never bought, never conditioned, never defined by anyone else's gaze. In that state, you no longer love because you need. You love because you're already complete. You no longer give to be validated. You give because you are who you are. And that's enough. If you've loved and lost, if you've traded yourself and failed, if you've hurt because someone didn't choose you, know that it's not the end, but an invitation to return. Return to who you once were before you learned to sacrifice yourself to be called someone's lover. And once you truly return, you'll understand. Love no longer leads to suffering. It becomes the doorway to enlightenment.